The numbers keep climbing, and honestly, almost no one wants to look directly at them. Young men in their 20s and 30s, they're just disappearing into silence. They wake up exhausted, they scroll through screens that constantly tell them that they are the problem, and they come home to a room that feels inexplicably heavier than the day before. The body starts breaking down in these really quiet ways, and sleep, it just vanishes. This is a brutal, invisible reality happening right this very second. So in this explainer, we're going to uncover the exact framework to reverse this erasure, and we'll expose the devastating psychological trap that's waiting for you the absolute second you try to break out.
You really need to look closely at the physical symptoms of this erasure. It's everywhere. Relationships become purely transactional. Purpose feels hopelessly out of reach. Motivation just drains out, leaving this anger that turns violently inward. I mean, walk through any city at night and you'll see the casualties, right? Headphones on, eyes down, faces locked in that exact same flat expression. You see men filling up gyms, desperately chasing physical proof that they still exist. They're building armor for a battle they're already losing in every other aspect of their hollowed-out lives. Careers are stalling out in roles that demand mere compliance rather than actual capability. And you know what's truly terrifying when you start digging into these patterns? This stillness. It isn't rest at all. It's a localized failure. It's literally the first visible signal that something massive is breaking down. See, the modern world has built systems that aggressively punish hesitation, yet young men are absorbing this suffering without even having the language for it. They don't riot, they don't announce the pain, they just stop advancing. Think about your own daily routines for a second. Where have you quietly accepted a permanent blockage? Because let me tell you, the longer it stays unnamed, the deeper it digs.
Okay, let's dive into this. What looks like personal weakness on the outside is actually the visible edge of a much deeper, completely ruthless mechanism, your attitude. But I'm not talking about attitude as some fleeting mood. No, attitude is the invisible operating system deciding in real time whether your pain becomes fuel or poison. It heavily filters your reality. Neuroscience actually shows us how incredibly fast the brain wires itself to view pain as a permanent limitation instead of just temporary data. And once your attitude locks into a negative direction, it multiplies that external pressure, turning minor setbacks into inescapable concrete walls. To put that into perspective, imagine receiving some really harsh criticism at work. The old operating system processes it by immediately retreating. You judge the critic, you blame your circumstances, and you fiercely protect your shrinking comfort zone until that zone literally becomes a cage. Your energy collapses, and the suffering becomes completely self-reinforcing. You basically attract the exact conditions that confirm the darkness. But the new operating system, it processes that exact same criticism as reconnaissance. It demands willful expansion and converting that raw, painful data into strategic movement. Right now, most young men are fighting on the wrong terrain, defending cages that are actively shrinking right around them.
The good news? Those same neural pathways can be reversed. But listen to me, the reversal is not gentle. Reversing this requires exact, unyielding force. The data points to 4 radical disciplines that absolutely must be executed in sequence: forced awareness, radical ownership, conversion of suffering, and permanent installation. If you leave this to chance, or if you kind of just ignore the specific order of this sequence, you will be quietly erased by the environment around you. So, discipline 1 is forced reconnaissance. For 7 consecutive days, you have to treat your own mind like a crime scene. Track every single negative judgment immediately after someone leaves a room. Note every physical tightening in your chest or your jaw when your ideas are challenged. Why? Because your mind will immediately try to defend its own cage by lying to you about these reactions. You have to treat yourself as a hostile witness. Do not edit the data, do not justify it, just record it. If you skip this really uncomfortable baseline, the rest of the architecture completely collapses. By the 3rd week of data collection, you introduce a deliberate disruption. We call it the 3-second pause. You force a gap between the trigger and your usual negative response. Neurologically speaking, this tiny gap disrupts established neural pathways. In that silence, you ask one question, and one question only. Is this attitude serving the direction I claim to want? This deliberate interruption forces that invisible slant right out into the light, turning it into a visible target. You're essentially destroying the pattern's ability to protect itself in the dark.
Once your patterns are visible, you must take radical ownership. Look, the modern environment desperately trains you to see yourself as a helpless product of these massive, uncontrollable systems. You have to deliberately decide that your attitude is the dominant variable. State 3 specific outcomes out loud every single morning before you even touch your phone. Why out loud? Well, auditory feedback loops actually force the brain to process intention as physical reality. Practice one skill daily for 30 days. Historical and scientific data consistently prove that relentless repetition in extreme environments utterly destroys the myth of innate talent. You have to stop waiting for external permission.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Discipline 3 alters the very function of pain. Prolonged difficulty isn't proof you're broken. It's the only reliable forge. After a major setback, you need to sit down and write out exactly what happened. Define precisely what part was strictly under your control. Identify the specific uncomfortable skill you are now forced to confront. You are literally taking the raw emotion of failure and converting it into cold, usable training data. This forces the brain to build entirely new capacity instead of just shutting down.
72 hours. That is your total window for a counterstrike. Within 72 hours of a massive setback, you must schedule a deliberate exposure to a similar difficulty. If the setback was a brutal social rejection, initiate a new, high-stakes contact. If it was a professional failure, take the next small professional risk. You have to force an immediate action, because if you wait longer, the brain solidifies the failure as a permanent identity. You must utterly refuse that comforting lie of explaining failure away as just bad luck.
Discipline 4 is permanent installation. Let's be real, relying on daily motivation is a fatal gamble. You must conduct a brutal weekly review every single Sunday. Rate the frequency of your negative patterns. Rate the frequency of your successful, deliberate interruptions. Then, escalate the next week's exposure to discomfort based on those exact numbers. If you try to negotiate with this step, if you let even one Sunday slide, the environment will quietly reclaim all the territory you fought so hard for all week.
And this brilliantly illustrates the historical precedent for this exact operating system, Frederick Douglass. Born into slavery, denied formal education, and subjected to deliberate, violent attempts to break his spirit, he weaponized his internal attitude against systems designed to literally erase him. The external conditions were as extreme as mathematically possible, but his internal decision-making process, his absolute ownership of his response, was the single variable that allowed him to move from absolute constraint to massive public influence. He exaggerated the power of his own will simply because the alternative was permanent erasure.
But going through the source material for this explainer revealed a terrifying hidden trap. After you escalate and actually gain real power, the third phase hits, the fatal regression trap. The residual pull of your old operating system doesn't just vanish. It waits in the dark for your fatigue, for a moment of isolation. It offers these familiar, comforting explanations for why you should just rest for a bit. Early gains create this false sense of safety, so you relax the reconnaissance, you drop the daily will statements, and suddenly, boom, you trigger a devastating incremental slide backward into withdrawal and self-harm.
The modern environment actually actively accelerates this fatal slide backward. I mean, how do digital echo chambers strip away your agency? By rewarding your outrage with dopamine. While you actually accomplish nothing in the real world, they exist solely to validate your negative slant. Economic arrangements reward short-term compliance while systematically stripping away your long-term leverage, and cultural narratives constantly frame male struggle as collective guilt or just act like it's entirely non-existent. Every single small surrender of your new attitude returns vital, hard-won territory right back to the old one. You have to brutally ask yourself, who actually benefits from this silent erasure? It's a chilling macro-level truth. Systems that require compliant labor actively prefer men who doubt their own capacity to rewrite the rules. They prefer you quiet, they prefer you doubting, they prefer your energy entirely absorbed in the private management of your own pain. Because when you are totally distracted by your own internal collapse, you stop building, you stop leading, you stop threatening the status quo. So the crucial point is that this leaves us staring at three unavoidable paths forward in this rearrangement of power. Path 1 is private erosion, where influence just concentrates in forces that prefer passive, easily manipulated populations. Path 2 is partial correction, creating uneven recovery and bitter new internal divisions among those who barely survive. And Path 3 is wider recognition. Those who master these four disciplines will completely redistribute true leverage. They will occupy positions of power simply because they absolutely refuse to stop moving when everyone else does.
The external pressure is real. There's absolutely no denying that. But the filter, turning it into permanent crushing weight, that is internal. It is adjustable. The systems benefiting from your hesitation are never going to dismantle themselves. Which brings us to a terrifying reality. The question is,
Which version of this decision is already being made tonight, in the quiet room where you sit alone at the end of another ordinary day? Your operating system is running right now. Which path are you already walking?